There's a war happening right now, no bombs, no soldiers, no declared enemies, but make no mistake, America is losing. And the most terrifying part is that most Americans have no idea it's even happening. While we argue about culture wars and political theater, China is quietly winning the actual war that matters, the economic and technological battle for the 21st century. Let me show you something that should absolutely terrify you. In the time it takes you to watch this video, China will have laid more high-speed rail track than America has built in its entire history. They'll graduate more engineers than the U.S. has total engineering students. They'll install more renewable energy capacity than Europe combined. And while this happens, American politicians will still be debating whether infrastructure week is coming. This isn't about communism versus capitalism. This isn't about democracy versus authoritarianism. This is about a country that has a plan competing against a country that can't agree on anything long enough to execute one. And we're getting demolished. Let's start with something simple that illustrates the entire problem. Ports. The top 10 busiest container ports in the world, 9 are in China, 1 is in Singapore, 0 in America. Los Angeles, America's busiest port, ranks 17th globally and operates at a fraction of the efficiency of Shanghai or Shenzhen. During the supply chain crisis of 2021 and 2022, American ports had container ships waiting weeks to unload. Chinese ports, they were operating normally, processing ships in hours. But here's the kicker. It's not just that China has better ports. They own or operate significant stakes in ports all over the world. Piraeus in Greece, Gwadar in Pakistan, Hambantota in Sri Lanka, and dozens more. China is literally controlling the infrastructure of global trade while America argues about whether infrastructure spending is socialism. Think about what this means strategically. In a conflict, China could potentially disrupt global shipping without firing a single shot. They control the choke points. They own the cranes, the terminals, the logistics software. Meanwhile, the United States can't even get funding to repair bridges that are literally collapsing. Let's talk about something that should be a national emergency but somehow isn't: education. China graduates approximately 5 million STEM students per year. The United States, maybe 600,000. Now you might say population difference, but let's do the math. China has 4 times the population but produces 8 times the STEM graduates. Per capita, they're doubling our output of the people who will build the technologies of the future. And it's not just quantity. The quality gap is closing rapidly. Chinese universities now rank among the global elite in engineering, computer science, and physical sciences. Tsinghua and Peking universities are competing directly with MIT and Stanford for top talent and research output. Meanwhile, American students are drowning in debt for degrees that don't lead to jobs. And our public schools rank below Estonia in math and science. Here's something nobody wants to admit. China is outcompeting America in the free market. Yes, you heard that right. The communist country is beating the capitalist country at capitalism. How? Because while American companies are obsessed with quarterly earnings and stock buybacks, Chinese companies are thinking in decades. Look at the electric vehicle market. Tesla was the pioneer, the innovator, the company that proved EVs could be cool and profitable. Now, Chinese company BYD sold more EVs than Tesla last year. They're cheaper, they're improving faster, and they're backed by an entire ecosystem of battery manufacturers, charging infrastructure, and government support. In 10 years, the global auto industry will likely be dominated by Chinese companies, and Detroit will be wondering what happened. Or take solar panels. America invented the technology. Chinese companies now control over 70% of global production. They didn't steal this. They out-invested, out-manufactured, and out-competed Western companies. Same story with batteries, wind turbines, and increasingly with semiconductors, despite American efforts to block them. The semiconductor story is particularly instructive. The U.S. banned the export of advanced chip-making equipment to China, thinking it would cripple their tech industry. What happened? China accelerated domestic research and development, started making breakthroughs faster than expected, and began building an independent supply chain. Huawei just released a smartphone with a 7-nanometer chip that American experts said China couldn't produce for years. Every time we try to contain China technologically, they treat it as a challenge to overcome rather than a barrier that stops them. Let me tell you about something called the Digital Silk Road that almost nobody in America understands. While American tech companies were focused on social media and advertising, China was exporting digital infrastructure to the developing world. Huawei built 4G and 5G networks across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Chinese companies provided cloud services, e-commerce platforms, and digital payment systems to billions of people. What does this mean? It means that the digital infrastructure of the future for most of the world's population will be Chinese, not American. The standards, the protocols, the data flows, all running through Chinese systems. When an African entrepreneur builds a business, they're more likely to use Alibaba's playbook than Amazon's. When a Southeast Asian consumer shops online, they're probably using a platform modeled on Chinese apps. America is losing the infrastructure battle of the 21st century, and infrastructure is destiny. Just like Britain controlled the seas in the 19th century and America controlled the skies in the 20th century, whoever controls digital infrastructure will dominate the 21st century. And right now, China is winning that race. Here's something that should make every American angry. We're not losing because China is cheating. We're losing because we're not competing. Our political system has become so dysfunctional that we can't pass basic infrastructure bills without years of debate. China announces a project and breaks ground within months. We study problems to death. They solve them imperfectly but quickly, then iterate and improve. The Belt and Road Initiative is the perfect example. Announced in 2013, it's now active in over 140 countries with over $1 trillion invested in infrastructure projects, roads, railways, ports, power plants, digital networks spanning 3 continents. It's the largest infrastructure project in human history, and it's reshaping global trade routes to center on China. What was America's response? We criticized it, called it debt trap diplomacy, and warned countries not to participate. But we didn't offer an alternative. We didn't say, here's America's infrastructure plan for the developing world. We just said no to China's plan and offered nothing in return. Guess what happened? Countries took China's money because something is better than nothing. Let's talk about something uncomfortable. American exceptionalism is becoming American delusion. We still think we're number one at everything, but the data tells a different story. Life expectancy, we rank 46th globally and falling. Infant mortality, worse than Cuba. Infrastructure quality, 23rd. Education outcomes, mediocre and declining. The only categories where America truly dominates are military spending and incarceration rates. Meanwhile, Chinese life expectancy has surpassed American life expectancy. Chinese infrastructure is state-of-the-art while ours crumbles. Chinese students outperform American students in virtually every measurable category, but we still act like we're so far ahead that we don't need to worry. This complacency is killing us. We mock Chinese electric cars as cheap knockoffs while they're outperforming Western brands in quality tests. We dismiss Chinese technology companies as copycats while they're filing more patents than American companies. We laugh at their ghost cities while they become thriving metropolises and our cities decay. Here's a prediction that will probably upset people. In 20 years, the average Chinese citizen will have a higher standard of living than the average American citizen. Not the rich Chinese, not the urban elite, but the average person. better infrastructure, better health care, better education, less debt, more economic opportunity. This isn't because communism is better than capitalism. It's because China is investing in its future and America is consuming its past. Look at debt levels. American household debt is crushing people. Student loans, medical bills, credit cards, mortgages. The average American is one emergency away from financial catastrophe. Meanwhile, Chinese household savings rates are among the highest in the world. They're building wealth, we're building debt. Or look at social mobility. The American dream used to mean that your children would do better than you. That's now more true in China than in America. A Chinese kid born in poverty has a better chance of reaching the middle class than an American kid in the same situation. How did we let that happen? Let me tell you about the technology gap that nobody wants to acknowledge. China now leads the world in 37 out of 44 critical technology areas, according to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. These aren't just gadgets and apps. We're talking about artificial intelligence, quantum computing, hypersonic missiles, synthetic biology, and advanced materials. The technologies that will define military, economic, and social power for the next 50 years. American politicians keep saying we need to out-innovate China, but then they don't fund the research. They don't support the education system that produces innovators. They don't build the infrastructure that enables innovation. They just say we need to do better and then cut budgets for science and technology. Meanwhile, China is spending massive amounts on research and development, building world-class research facilities, attracting top global talent with competitive salaries and funding, and most importantly, they're executing long-term plans. They set goals for 2030, 2049, even 2075, and they systematically work toward them. American planning horizon, the next election cycle, maybe 2 years, maybe 4 years, maybe 6 years if you're a senator. No American politician is thinking about where the country needs to be in 2050 because they'll be long retired by then. This short-term thinking is a systemic disadvantage in competition with a country that thinks in decades and centuries. Here's something that really drives this home: space technology. China landed a rover on the far side of the moon, something no other country has done. They built their own space station after being excluded from the International Space Station. They're planning moon bases and Mars missions. Their space program is advancing rapidly with clear goals and consistent funding. America's space program, we can't even agree on whether we should go back to the moon or straight to Mars. NASA's budget gets cut, then increased, then redirected based on political whims. We retired the space shuttle and spent years relying on Russia to get our astronauts to space. Our Mars timeline keeps getting pushed back. Meanwhile, China is executing their plan right on schedule. Let's talk about something that affects every American but few understand: manufacturing. America's manufacturing base has been hollowed out over decades. We told ourselves this was fine, that we'd be the innovation economy while China did the dirty work of making things. Terrible strategy. Manufacturing isn't just about making stuff, it's where you develop process innovations, where you train skilled workers, where you maintain the capability to actually build the things you design. When you lose manufacturing, you eventually lose the ability to innovate because you're disconnected from the production process. China understood this. They welcomed manufacturing, learned from it, improved it, and now they're innovating because they have the manufacturing base and expertise. They can go from prototype to mass production in weeks. American companies now take months or years because we don't have the infrastructure or expertise anymore. The pandemic exposed this catastrophically. We couldn't make enough masks, ventilators, or basic medical supplies because we'd outsourced all that manufacturing to China. We were literally dependent on our strategic rival for emergency medical equipment. That should have been a wake-up call. Instead, we went back to sleep. Here's something that gets ignored. China is winning the soft power competition in the developing world. While American foreign policy focuses on military alliances and lecturing countries about human rights, China shows up with checkbooks and construction crews. They build roads, hospitals, schools, and power plants. They offer loans and investment without political conditions. Is some of this self-interested? Of course. Are some projects poorly designed or create debt problems? Absolutely. But from the perspective of a developing country, China is offering concrete help while America offers abstract values. When you need a highway, Chinese pragmatism beats American idealism. This matters because these countries represent the future. Africa will have 2 billion people by 2050. Southeast Asia is already an economic powerhouse. Latin America is full of emerging markets. Whoever has influence in these regions will shape the global order of the second half of this century. And right now, China is building that influence while America lectures from a distance. Let's address the military elephant in the room. Yes, America has the most powerful military in the world. We spend more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. We have more aircraft carriers, more advanced fighters, more nuclear weapons. But what good is military superiority if you're losing the economic war? Britain had the most powerful navy in the world in 1914 and 1939, but they lost their empire anyway because their economy couldn't sustain it. The Soviet Union had enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world, but they collapsed because their economy failed. Military power rests on economic foundations, and those foundations in America are eroding while China's are strengthening. Moreover, China is developing military technologies specifically designed to neutralize American advantages. Hypersonic missiles that can sink aircraft carriers, cyber capabilities that can disrupt American infrastructure, satellite killers that can blind American forces. They're not trying to match America's military symmetrically. They're developing asymmetric capabilities to make America's expensive military assets vulnerable. Here's a terrifying scenario that keeps military strategists up at night: a conflict over Taiwan. Not whether America could win militarily, but whether America could sustain a conflict economically. What happens when the global supply chain completely collapses? When Chinese manufacturing shuts down? When trade stops flowing? The economic devastation could be worse than the military conflict. And that's assuming America would win militarily, which is no longer certain. War games consistently show that defending Taiwan would be extremely costly, and the outcomes are far from guaranteed. China has home field advantage, shorter supply lines, and the ability to concentrate forces. America would be fighting 8,000 miles from home in China's backyard. But here's the real issue. We probably won't fight over Taiwan because the economic cost would be unbearable for both sides, which means China can slowly increase pressure, expand control, and eventually achieve reunification without America being willing to pay the price to stop it. We're being deterred by economic interdependence that we allowed to develop. Let me talk about something that really bothers me. American discourse about China is stuck in the past. We're still arguing about whether China will collapse or liberalize, questions that were relevant 20 years ago but are absurd today. China isn't collapsing. They've had near zero COVID deaths per capita compared to America. Their economy recovered faster from the pandemic, and they're achieving their development goals. China isn't liberalizing politically, and they don't care what we think about it. They've concluded that their system works for them, and they're doubling down on it. We can argue about whether this is good or bad, but pretending they're going to become a Western-style democracy is delusional. Meanwhile, China's discourse about America is sophisticated and clear-eyed. They study our weaknesses, our political divisions, our economic problems, our social tensions. They understand us better than we understand them, and they're exploiting that knowledge gap. Here's what really scares me: the trajectory. It's not that China is ahead in everything. They're not. America still has significant advantages in many areas, but the direction of travel is clear. China is improving rapidly in areas where they're behind. America is stagnating or declining in areas where we're ahead. If current trends continue, China will achieve comprehensive superiority within decades. Think about what this means. A world where the dominant power is authoritarian, where surveillance is normalized, where individual rights are subordinate to collective goals, where dissent is crushed, where the internet is censored, where information is controlled. Whether you think this is good or bad, it's radically different from the American-led order of the past 75 years. And we're sleepwalking into it. Americans are more concerned about what pronoun someone uses or what some politician tweeted than the fact that our country is losing its global position. We're arguing about statues and sports team names while China builds the future. Here's the most frustrating part. We're losing to China in areas where we should have natural advantages. Innovation, we have the best universities, the most dynamic private sector, a culture that celebrates entrepreneurship, but we can't translate that into national success because we're too divided, too short-term focused, too politically paralyzed to execute. Infrastructure, we're rich, we have the resources, we just can't agree on spending them. Meanwhile, China, with lower per capita GDP, is building world-class infrastructure because they can make collective decisions and stick to them. Education, we invented mass public education. We created the modern research university, but now our schools are failing, our students are indebted, and we're falling behind countries that learned from our model and improved it. Let me be clear about something. This isn't about admiring China's political system. I'm not saying we should adopt authoritarianism, but we need to be honest about the competition. You don't need to like your opponent to respect their capabilities and learn from their successes. Right now, America is too arrogant to learn and too divided to compete effectively. Here's what needs to happen if America wants to remain competitive. Massive infrastructure investment, not over 10 years, but starting immediately. Education reform that prioritizes STEM, critical thinking, and prepares students for the economy of the future. Industrial policy that rebuilds American manufacturing and strategic sectors, long-term planning that transcends election cycles, political reform that reduces polarization and enables governance. Will any of this happen? Probably not, because it requires Americans to agree on something, and we can't even agree on basic facts anymore. China's greatest advantage isn't their system of government, it's our dysfunction. They don't need to beat us, we're beating ourselves. Here's my challenge to you. Stop thinking about China as a backwards communist country that's inevitably going to fail. Start thinking about them as a peer competitor that's executing a long-term strategy to become the dominant global power. Look at what they're actually doing, not what we wish they were doing, and then ask yourself, what is America doing to compete? Really, what's our plan? Infrastructure weak that never comes, education reform that never happens, manufacturing revival that stays a slogan, or are we just hoping that freedom and democracy will magically triumph while we do nothing? The scary answer is that we don't have a plan. We have slogans, we have rhetoric, we have political theater, but we don't have a coherent national strategy to maintain American competitiveness and prosperity in the face of determined Chinese competition. China has a plan for 2035, for 2049, for 2075. They're working that plan systematically, investing trillions of dollars, mobilizing millions of people, building the capabilities they need to achieve their goals. Whether we like their goals or not is irrelevant. They have them, and they're working toward them. America's plan, hope that China fails, hope that their system collapses, hope that we stay ahead without actually doing the work. Hope is not a strategy. So yes, America is losing to China, and the most dangerous part is that we're losing without realizing it. We're still acting like the undisputed champion while we're getting outworked, outinvested, and outplanned by a competitor who's hungrier, more focused, and more determined than we are. The question isn't whether China will overtake America at current trajectories. That's increasingly inevitable. The question is whether America will wake up in time to do something about it, or whether we'll keep arguing about trivia while our position erodes until one day we look up and realize the world has moved on without us. I don't have a happy ending for you because this story isn't over, and right now we're not winning, but awareness is the first step. If enough Americans understand what's actually happening, maybe, just maybe, we can start having the conversations we need to have and making the changes we need to make. But that requires something we're very bad at right now, facing uncomfortable truths. And the most uncomfortable truth of all is that American decline isn't inevitable destiny forced upon us by external forces. It's a choice we're making through our own dysfunction, our own short-sightedness, our own inability to work together toward common goals. China isn't beating us, we're beating ourselves. And until we're ready to admit that and do something about it, we'll keep losing a war we don't even realize we're fighting.